Welcome to OOD Works, the podcast, a show about unique individuals and the services provided by Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, the state agency that helps individuals with disabilities find a job and be more independent. Here's your host, Kim Jump.
In this episode of OOD Works podcast, my colleague Fern Mealy, Constituent Communications Manager, sits down with Dr. Bill Darling, Director of Assistive Technology of Ohio, College of Engineering at The Ohio State University. With June 2020 marking the 100th anniversary of the Vocational Rehabilitation Program, as well as the 50th anniversary of Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, it's a great time to look back on important historical events. This episode shines light on Simeon Fess, an Ohioan unfamiliar to many, but Simeon was an important figure in the Vocational Rehabilitation Program during his service as a U.S. Congressman. Bill shares how he learned about the Smith-Fess Act while studying for his master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from Southern Illinois University. Bill's wife Jill is from Greene County, and both sets of her grandparents lived in Yellow Springs. One day, while at the Glen Forest Cemetery visiting some family grave sites, Bill came upon an impressive gravestone for a statesman and politician named Fess. He learned it was the same Fess from the Smith-Fess Act, and Bill took it upon himself to study Fess's life, the role he had in vocational rehabilitation, and the impact he had on people with disabilities. And with that, I'll turn it over to Fern and Bill.
My name is Bill Darling, and I am the Director of Assistive Technology of Ohio at Ohio State University.
Well, that is wonderful. Thank you, Bill Darling. I'm so excited that we could do this today in honor of the 100th anniversary of vocational rehabilitation in the United States and OOD's 50th anniversary. Can you tell us, who is Simeon Fess?
Well, Simeon Fess was an Ohio educator and a statesman, a politician. He was born in 1861. He was born a long time ago. He was born in a little town called Harrod, Ohio, which is in Allen County, not far from Lima. And, you know, he was educated locally in country schools and things like that. He went to Ohio Northern University, as it's called now, which was just another 10 miles down the road for him. And I think he went part-time and ended up graduating from college when he was about 27, 28 years old, and immediately started working for Ohio Northern and worked for them for a long time. He started taking, after he graduated from college there, he went to the law school gradually and eventually graduated from Ohio Northern University Law School. But he was also an administrator there. He eventually became the dean of the law school at Ohio Northern and the vice president of the university. So one of the things that he has in common with our current governor is they're both graduates of the law school at Ohio Northern University. But Simeon Fess eventually went to Chicago. He worked at the University of Chicago, very prestigious university there. And then he, in 1907, I believe, came back and was named the president of Antioch College in Yellow Springs. So, and so it's a very interesting life. He was the president of Antioch for 10 years. Somewhere in the middle of that 10-year tenure, he decided to run for Congress as a Republican, and he was elected to Congress. And I don't know how this worked exactly, but for 5 years he was in Congress while he remained the president of Antioch College. I don't really think that could work today, but I think a lot of colleges would love to have their president be a member of Congress. It might help solve some of their financial issues. But he did that and then served 10 years in the House in the state of Ohio, and then eventually ran for the U.S. Senate and served 2 terms in the U.S. Senate. So he had a very interesting life in education and politics, and it's just kind of very interesting how it all came to be. I'm sure that's probably not the life he envisioned when he was growing up in the farms and in Harrod. So he had a very, very interesting go of it, and ended up doing some very prestigious things.
what role did he play in bringing vocational rehabilitation into existence for people with disabilities?
Well, it's an interesting thing. He was the author of a very important, the Smith-Fess Act of 1920. But before that, I mean, they had he did not invent the concept of vocational rehabilitation. The country had a long-standing tradition of trying to do right by soldiers, people that were fighting in the wars. I think one of the very first American pieces of legislation was the Continental Congress passed a law to provide pensions for widows of soldiers that were killed in the Revolutionary War. I mean, it's something they've always been interested in. And so when we knew we were going to World War I, and that there was an acknowledgement there, and Simeon Fess wasn't part of this legislation, at least on a sponsorship level, but they had laws in place. They put laws in place to acknowledge the fact that people were going to be coming back from World War I as different people. They were going to be coming back as people with disabilities, missing limbs, blind, things like that, in wheelchairs. And then they deserved our investment. They deserved a chance to. They're not going to be able to go back to the farms or to the factories, but they still had, fought for their country. And so the government felt it was a worthy investment to try to get them different skills, something that they could go on and have a productive life. What Simeon Fess deserves the credit for is that he saw a broader picture, and that this was a wonderful concept, that the injured soldiers, disabled veterans are not the only people that could benefit from this mindset and this type of idea, because they're not the only people that are facing physical challenges. The world was completely different. The world of work was different back then. He was elected to Congress in 1912, I believe. And anyone who's ever read, if you've ever read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which was written about 5 years before that, what a scary place the world of work could be. I think that was the meatpacking industry that the author was highlighting. But it was a place where you could get significantly injured, grievously injured. And back then, there were almost no protections in place for injured workers. They would just, if you couldn't do it, they'd get rid of you and hire somebody else. So there were a lot of people in America that were in that same position that disabled soldiers, disabled veterans were coming back in, and they needed the same kind of services, and they had the same right to seek a dignified life, to have a trade, to be able to earn a living and provide for themselves. So Simeon Fess was really the one that looked at the broader picture and said, that this I like this idea for a system. I like the ability to reach out and help these people, and to have it end with a job. I mean, that is, the dignity of a job is incredibly important. And so he really, in partnership with his partner in the Senate, which was Hoke Smith from Georgia, they passed a bill that at least hoped to establish a nationwide system of providing specific vocational training, skill development, job search, all the things that they do, but for a wider group of people. The initial target were people that got hurt on the job primarily, but it was also widened out to include anyone, for whatever reason, that they found themselves in that situation. There would be a program hopefully in place for them to try to better their life. I don't think that Simeon Fess could have ever known what the system would become, or how many millions of people would be affected by it. But that was the thinking that he had back then, to try to reach people who, it is for the betterment of everyone, including them, if they learned a skill and went out and got a job and be able to have a productive life.
That's wonderful. Can you also tell us what, since that time, since the Smith-Fess Act was passed, what are some of the other developments over the years that have made accessibility in vocational rehab what they are today?
Well, I mean, obviously, you can start with the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I'll get to in a minute. But the world of work changed in America when Simeon Fess was envisioning a vocational rehabilitation system. Workers' compensation was not a universal concept yet. A handful of states had workers' comp laws and insurance and things like that, and it wasn't until I think 1949 or 1950 in which every state had workers' comp, which is incredibly important in this little world, because workers' comp provided you had to pay injured workers a salary when they got hurt. You had to cover their medical costs when they were related to the injury, and then you had to pay somebody to come in and do the job that they were not able to do at that time. And employers started to figure out that this isn't really good business to have injuries. So the workers' compensation system played a big role in making the world of work a little bit safer, and employers started to see the benefits of having a safer workplace, which kind of changed who the system was for. They had started reaching out through the decades to people you would consider more traditional people with disabilities, maybe somebody that's never had a job. The system at that point had been focused on returning people to employment following an injury or an illness. But then they started really reaching out to people and applying those same policies, that same viewpoint of the dignity of work to a section of our population that was often overlooked and not believed in, and that is just Americans with disabilities. And so the system itself, just by necessity, kept reaching out to a wider range of people that fit the category. And eventually, it became a system that was primarily for people that you would consider classically people with disabilities. And there were obviously a lot of incredibly important changes. The most important for this discussion would be the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is what set up the state federal vocational system that we know today. And if you look at I think the first sentence of that bill is that it repeals and replaces what was known as the Civilian Vocational Rehabilitation Act, which is the Smith-Fess Act. So there's a direct line from that bill and that program that evolved through the years to they decided they needed a new law. And that Rehab Act included a lot of things beyond just the state federal, just anti-discrimination against people with disabilities, and just a lot of important things that help change the lives. Moving on to the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is probably, it's considered the Civil Rights Act for people with disabilities, just an incredibly important thing that allowed people with disabilities the ability to move through society, to be able to go where they want and live where they want. And so that was an incredible acknowledgement by the government that these are citizens, that they should be afforded the same rights as other Americans and have the same opportunities as other Americans. But really, I think I don't think that the Americans with Disabilities Act comes into play without the Civilian Vocational Rehabilitation Act, without the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, showing that these are people worthy of the investment. They have something to offer. And the world of work is better for their participating in it. And so, I love this program. I love the state federal program. I love the idea of just employment, having something productive to do with your time and your life, making an impact that way. So incredibly important. And one of the things that's kind of sad in a way is I don't think Simeon, when Simeon Fess passed away, he served 2 years in the Senate, 2 terms in the Senate, 12 years. His Senate career ended in 1935, and he died in 1936. His gravestone says a lot of wonderful things about Simeon Fess. It doesn't mention, it doesn't mention vocational rehabilitation of soldiers or injured workers or people with disabilities. And I think now, in through the lens of history, that's an oversight. The impact that he had on millions of Americans with disabilities needs to be acknowledged, and because this is such a wonderful program, and I think it would be great, and I think his family would probably be honored to know and have it officially recognized the impact that he had on the lives of so many people. Maybe he couldn't even have envisioned it at the time, but it is a truly amazing program that probably would have never come into being without his vision for trying to provide a better life for people, for Americans with disabilities.
Absolutely. Can you tell us, in closing, a little bit about the work that you're doing at Assistive Technology of Ohio that's changing the future for people with disabilities? We're 100 years after that initial act.
Before I get to that, I'd like to mention just a couple more things.
Okay.
A little shout out for our governor. I mean, that the fact that they both went to Ohio Northern is not the only thing that they had in common. They they're both from Yellow Springs in a sense. I mean, Senator Fess was not born in Yellow Springs, but Mike DeWine grew up in Yellow Springs. Mike DeWine's grandfather was a professor at Antioch College, and his grandparents on his mother's side are buried at the Glen Forest Cemetery, not far from Simeon Fess. And that Simeon Fess's grave is literally right across the street from the house that Mike DeWine grew up in. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that when Governor DeWine was Senator DeWine in 1998, federal programs go through something called a reauthorization. You look at it every 4, 5, or 6 years, whatever the law calls for, to try to take the status of the law and how we do it, how can we make it better. In 1998, that job was given to a young senator from Ohio named Mike DeWine. So he was the chair of the subcommittee that was responsible for this legislation and this wonderful program, and he did a great job in 1998 of bringing everyone together to talk about this law. How can we make it better? He had hearings in Washington, he had hearings in Columbus. He brought the show on the road and got a lot of I think he was the legislator of the year for CSAVR for the tremendous job that he did. And it's just kind of an incredible. The idea that there are 2 U.S. senators from Yellow Springs, Ohio, is amazing. If you know Yellow Springs, the fact that they're both Republicans is statistically very unlikely. But also the fact that Mike DeWine had a role in strengthening and making better this law, this idea that Simeon Fess, who is buried across the street, started in 1920, is kind of a neat way to come full circle for those 2 guys. And I think that Ohio has played an incredibly important role in you don't get any more important than the guy that wrote the law and the guy that helped make the law better. So I think that Ohio should be very proud of the role that they played in the vocational rehabilitation of Americans with disabilities. So just wanted to get that out there because it's a neat story and the tie that something our state should be very proud of. But our agency at Ohio State is a Assistive Technology of Ohio is a program in the College of Engineering. It is an example, I think, Fern, of the law was passed originally in 1988, and it was called something completely different. The Ohio, it was called the Technology Related Assistance to Individuals with Disabilities Act. And at the time, as with most federal programs, people thought, well, yes, technology is important for people with disabilities, and Congress is about 10 years late to get on that train. But I don't think they had any idea at the time how prescient Congress was in passing this bill, because technology took off and technology for people with disabilities took off. And we actually had a system in place to acknowledge that, to go out and try to educate professionals in the field, people with disabilities, their family members, on the ways that technology can improve the lives of Americans with disabilities. So we have it's just a wonderful program, mostly based, it's all focused on the types of technology that people can use to improve their lives. And it can be for anything. It can be for people that want to go to school, people that want to obtain and maintain employment, or just want to have a more independent, interconnected life. And I think one of the things the pandemic has shown us is that the need for technology with disabilities it didn't get less important. It got more important because now you see how you can participate in ways if you can't be there. If there's a physical challenge, such as now the rules, you can't travel around, you can't be with people, but there's still ways that you can get the work done. Technology, assistive technology is all technology focused on acknowledging some of the shortcomings that people with disabilities have, working around them or supplanting them, and just really is an amazing way to level the playing field and it furthers their opportunities and gives them a chance to be able to participate fully, to go to school, to use a computer, to be able to do the kinds of things in employment that everyone else does. And so it's an incredibly important program. They exist in every state. And we look at ourselves as a complement to wonderful programs like OOD, because technology, if they're going to succeed, if people with disabilities, Ohioans with disabilities are going to succeed, technology is going to play a part of that. If they're going to work, they're going to have to be technologically savvy like everyone else is. And so that's what excites us, really. I'm the director of the agency, and I'm a trained rehabilitation counselor. The fates would have it that I would never work for OOD, but I love the work that I do, and I'm especially happy when we can work with other agencies that are focused on employment. It is so important, and to use these technologies to help people either get a job or keep their job is life-changing and in a very fulfilling way to spend your professional career. So, we love the work that we do, and we're big fans of OOD and the amazing work that's done by rehabilitation counselors all over the country. And so, we think we're important, but we're just part of the piece. And we hope that people would know about us, rehab counselors would know about us and use us as a way to bring in the types of technologies that can really improve their clients' lives.
Well, we are really glad that you are there and doing what you do and that you're our partner. So thank you today for sharing this historical piece in honor of the anniversary of vocational rehab and our own birthday here at OOD. And we look forward to working with you as we go on here into the future.
Well, happy birthday, Fern, to OOD, and I appreciate it very much. We really do enjoy this, and look to work with OOD very closely from here on out. I mean, we think they're a wonderful partner, and we love to be able to help them in the important mission that they have.
A transcript of today's episode is available at ood.ohio.gov/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review. We're on social media at Ohio OOD. Do you have a disability? Do you want a job? We can help. oodworks.com.